Apple just released iOS 26.4.1 just a couple of weeks after the release of iOS 26.4. Now, along with this update, Apple also released iPadOS 26.4.1, but that's it. So this is just an iOS and iPadOS update, and that's all. So anyways, in this video, we will be discussing what's new in the update, if you should update, and of course, what to expect next. Now, starting off with the size of this update, it came in at just under 600 megabytes on my iPhone Air, which is coming from iOS 26.4. Now, that update size will of course be larger if you are coming from a version older than 26.4, and of course you will not see this update at all if you are currently on a beta. So if you're currently on the 26.5 betas, if you see, on next to beta updates right here, developer beta or public beta, you will not be seeing this update because you are currently on a higher version than 26.4.1, which of course is 26.5. Now let's go ahead and check out the build number. So if we head into our settings, general about, 26.4.1, if we tap on that right there, which is a new feature in 26.4, you can see here that we have 23E254 as the build number. So that is going to be the same build number that you see on iPadOS 26.4.1 as well. And then if we go back and check out the modem firmware down here, you can see that is at 2.04.03 on the iPhone Air. All right, so now what's new here in iOS 26.4.1? And if you take a look at the release notes here, or the description of this update, Apple does not really give us much to work with. They just simply say, this update provides bug fixes for your iPhone. That's it. Now notice how they do not mention anything about security patches or security updates in this sentence right here. However, below that, they do talk about the security contents of these iOS updates. So we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But let's first talk about these bug fixes that Apple is claiming have been fixed. So Apple does not clarify exactly what has been fixed. So the best we can do is just talk about some of the more recent bugs and talk about if those could be fixed or not. And I think the very first one, probably the one top of mind for a lot of people right now, has to do with the keyboard. So of course, with iOS 26.4, one of the biggest fixes in that update had to do with the fix for the keyboard, where sometimes the keys would be missed. If you were typing really fast, the keys would be missed, and then that would in turn mess up the autocorrect. So then autocorrect would get messed up. It was just a whole nightmare, honestly, with the keyboard, and a lot of people had to completely reset autocorrect on their phone because of the issues that were caused on iOS 26. But again, those were resolved with iOS 26.4. However, if you still had those issues lingering, this update could fix that. So for example, if you go look at the comments on my 26.4 video and really 26.5 beta 1 video as well, you will see people talking about how the keyboard issue is not fully resolved for them. Some people saw no difference. The majority of people did see a difference. Let me just clarify. Most people did see a big difference after 26.4 released. Pretty much everybody's keyboard issues went away that they were having. However, if they were not for some reason, I would imagine that 26.4.1 does also, fix that for those people that it maybe didn't fix before. And one thing to try out also, if your autocorrect is still broken and really messed up, if you go into your settings here and go to general and then go down here to transfer or reset iPhone and go to reset, you can go right here to reset keyboard dictionary, and that will reset that for you. Now, something else that's been changed with iOS 26.4.1 has to do with a setting on your iPhone. If you go into settings and go down here to privacy and security, and then scroll down to the bottom, we have stolen device protection. So iOS 26.4.1 will enable this automatically on devices that update from iOS 26.4 to 26.4.1. So this was thought to be enabled in iOS 26.4, but according to Apple themselves, they're listing this as a new change in iOS 26.4.1. So if you do have stolen device protection turned off when you're updating from 26.4, this will be enabled when you come back and install 26.4.1. And I would recommend having this set to away from familiar locations, that we don't have to always require the security delay. But this feature now should be enabled by default after updating to 26.4.1 from 26.4. This update also fixes a bug that was impacting developers on iOS 26.4, and it was actually a pretty noteworthy one. So it had to do with iCloud Sync not working with iPhone, but it did work fine for the Mac, which would also kind of describe why this update was only pushed out for the iPhone and iPad. This seems to be one of the bugs that has been fixed, and you can see the last post here does confirm confirm that this was fixed in 26.4.1. Now we should also mention the issue with the App Store, because a lot of people have been having issues with the App Store being very slow, very sluggish when just navigating around the application. Even after iOS 26.4, some people were having this issue. So 26.4 I think did resolve it for a lot of people, kind of just like the keyboard bug, but there are also a lot of people having issues with the sports app or with the App Store application, specifically when searching for an application, or like I said, just navigating around. It just seemed to be very sluggish before. So that appears to be fixed for me. It wasn't really too bad before. It was a little bit sluggish on this device, but if you were having that issue previously, that could be fixed here with 26.4.1. And also just lag in general. So obviously a lot of people have performance issues on iOS these days. It really can be a number of, scenarios that cause that, not necessarily iOS causing, those lag issues, things like low battery, things like low power mode, things like, running low on storage. All those contribute to having a poor, performing device. So, most of the time I say it is a user error, not necessarily iOS's issue. However, for that small percentage that we're having issues with performance and lag, that could be resolved here with 26.4.1 as well. And we will talk about the performance here in a moment as well. But before that, I do want to talk about the spotlight bug, because this is something else that I did have issues on with iOS 26.4, specifically in the betas, and it did happen a little bit in the final release as well. But now with 26.4.1, it does appear to be fixed completely. Now, I will preface that by saying this is a different device than the device I did have those issues on, so I will have to continue using this to confirm, because it is also fixed in 26.5. Beta 1. So just keep that in mind. If you had issues with Spotlight, it could be resolved here, and it is for sure resolved in 26.5 Beta 1. Now I do want to talk about the security updates, because again, if you go into your About section right here and go into the link that they send you for the security releases, there is something interesting I wanted to point out here, because if you go down here, you'll see that Apple does not list anything for iOS or iPadOS 26.4.1 in terms of any CVEs that have been patched. Now, does that mean that there are no security patches in this update? No. However, I think this update, there probably are not going to be any security patches. And the only reason I say that is because this update was only pushed out for iOS and iPadOS, not macOS, not tvOS, not watchOS, none of those. And, some of the more common bugs out there, some of the more common, vulnerabilities that get exploited have to do with WebKit. And typically, if there is a WebKit bug, like something that is going to be exploited, it will work across all devices. So since this update was only released for the iPhone and the iPad, that makes me think that there are not any type of WebKit, security issues that need to be squashed. And also there's probably not anything else that needs to be fixed security wise in this update. I think this update is more for bug fixes and not for security enhancements, which also Apple did say that. They didn't say anything about security updates, in this update as well. So yes, there is a possibility of something being out there that has been fixed, but I doubt it. And Apple does not list anything here for those CVE entries. And if you've been having any other issues with iOS 26.4, please let me know in a comment down below, and also check on those with 26.4.1, and feel free to let me know in a comment down below if anything has been addressed or fixed for you. Now, as far as performance goes, performance feels fine here on my iPhone Air. So, I don't think there's going to be any type of major performance boost with iOS 26.4.1. It could be a little bit better, but don't expect any dramatic changes, any drastic changes with this double point update. So you can see here, I did run a fresh Geekbench 6 test, and we scored a 3414 single core, 9201 on the multi-core. And if we compare that to iOS 26.4 right below it, you can see I was actually low on battery when I did this and also installing the update. So the scores are kind of skewed, but you can see a good bit higher there. And actually, if we go down here on, down the list, you can actually see that maybe that wasn't the reason why. It's just higher simply, especially for multi-core. So multi-core a lot higher than what we saw previously on really any other updates. So yeah, expect performance to be rock solid here on 26.4.1, and I would expect the same really for every iOS 26 update from here on out, as we've reached more of the mature stage of iOS 26 at this point. Now, as far as battery life goes, I'm currently at 39%, so you'll have to tell me what I started with. Aside from that screenshot at the very beginning, this is the iPhone Air, so it probably will run down a little bit quicker than my typical 17 Pro Max that I use for my main beta videos. But yeah, battery life here, I would also expect it to be very similar to performance. I don't really, envision any type of major change coming with battery life here with this update. And really, like I said, it may get a little bit better, from here on out, but usually by the 0.5 updates, that's typically when battery life is really at its peak. It doesn't really improve or go down much after that. So with all that being said, should you update to iOS 26.4.1? And I would say that if you're currently on iOS 26.4, then yes, you should absolutely update because again, you don't really have anything to lose with this update. You're not gonna, get worse performance or worse battery life, anything like that. You are just going to get some of those bug fixes that you may have been encountering. And of course, it's always just good to keep your device as up to date as possible. Now, I would say if you're on iOS 26.3.1 or older, like the iOS 26.3, maybe even 26.2, if you've just been slacking on updates, then yeah, I would definitely go ahead and update to iOS 26.4.1 because you're also going to get all the new features that came with iOS 26.4. But let's look a little bit further ahead now to what's next for Apple. So next up is going to be iOS 26.5. Now, could Apple release a 26.4.2? Yes, it's a possibility. However, I don't think it's very likely at this point. So I think that we are going to see iOS 26.5 as the next public official release, and that should be out at some point in May. So I would not expect that in April because we are currently on the first beta still for iOS 26.5. So I would expect the second beta for iOS 26.5 to come next week on the week of April 13th, if not on Monday, April 13th itself. So that'll be beta 2, and then after that we should be on a weekly release schedule. So maybe it's going to be beta 3, beta 4, and then maybe the RC on the week of May 4th, and then the final release around May 11th. So I would expect it to be in the first half of May for 26.5. And then of course, after iOS 26.5 gets released, I think everybody's eyes are going to be on early June, specifically June 8th, because that's when we'll see Apple officially unveil iOS 27, which is going to be a big update. Despite what everybody's saying about it being a bug fix update and not many changes, I think it's going to surprise a lot of people, especially with all the AI features, Apple Intelligence, all that fun stuff. So I'm pretty excited for that, and we will be seeing that again on Monday, June 8th. And that will be when the first beta comes out as well, but we won't see the official final release until September. So it will come a few months later when the new iPhones launch. So anyways, guys, there you have it. That is iOS 26.4.1, a relatively minor, actually a really minor update, but that's to be expected with a double point update. But I did just want to bring you guys this video to tell you it was out, and of course, that you should update, especially if you're still having some of those lingering issues that could be resolved with this public release here. So let me know what you guys think about this update and the video in general down in the comment section below. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.